Hey everybody, it's Brian and welcome to the 6th C# tutorial. Go ahead and make a console application. Today we're going to do the do loop. Syntax is very simple. Do with 2 brackets, and then while, and then an expression. So we need to make a variable. We'll say int, call this counter. We'll say counter equals 0. And we're going to say counter plus plus. That increments the counter. And we're going to say console.writeLine, and we're just going to print out the value of counter. Now we need the expression of counter less than 10. So let's break this down really quickly and see what's going on here. We have a variable, we're calling this a counter. It's set to 0, so this is like saying the number 0. And then we're incrementing the counter. That's what this plus plus is. It's the increment operator. And then we're writing counter out to the output stream. We're saying while counter is less than 10. Oh, it appeared and disappeared because we forgot to do our console read. F5 to run. So you can see while it's less than 10, it prints it out. Now, what would happen if you forgot this right here? Say while counter. Notice how there are build errors. Cannot implicitly convert type int to bool. If you click on that, it takes you exactly where the problem is, and you can actually highlight it with your mouse, and you'll say cannot implicitly convert type int to bool. Now what is that saying? Well, if you remember, an integer is a number, and a bool is a true false, a light switch, on off. So what we're saying is you cannot convert a number to an on off. So that's why you have to say counter less than, or you could say counter greater than something, or less than or equal to 10. Now when you run it, you notice because we said less than or equal to, it went up to 11 that time. So that's how you determine when this counter is going to stop. Now, to really understand what's going on here, we should switch these two around. Do loops are kind of confusing to newcomers because they don't really understand what's going on under the hood. You notice how all we did was flip this around. We're writing to the console, then incrementing the counter. This gives you a better idea of what's actually happening here. It starts at 0, and then it goes through 9. And you notice how it stops at 9 because we're saying while it's less than 10. So once it hit 10, it just stopped. It said 9 and then incremented it to 10. And when it hit this again, it just said, nope, not running it. So that's how the do loop works. Now, if you wanted to make an infinite loop, you could just say while true. And let's run that, and you can see it just keeps going and going. Eventually, we will fill up the number space for an integer, and this program will eventually crash. We don't want that. So you should always have a limit to your do loop, unless you want an infinite loop, which is usually reserved for like video games or network monitoring, things of that nature. But those get into synchronous operations, something we're not really even close to yet. So we're just going to say while counter is less than 10. And we're going to cover what's called the while loop. And I'm going to show you guys a little trick here. If you right click, you see this surround with. You get a handy little list here, and you can just pick and choose from whatever you want. So if you forget something and you can't see it, but at the bottom of the screen is while, you just double click it. It puts the syntax out there for you. See how it says while true? So this is an infinite loop right here. We don't want that. So what we're going to do is say counter, and we're just going to set this back to 0. Notice how we are not saying int counter, because we would declare the variable. That's bad. We're redeclaring the variable, and it actually, see how it gets mad, underlines and says local variable named counter already exists in the current scope. What that means is you've redeclared it. You've already got something out there called counter. Remember, a variable is something that'll change. We're just going to change the number here. Switch it back to 0, and we're going to say while counter is less than 10. Then we're pretty much just going to do the exact same thing. F5 to run. And let's see what happens here. We have 0 through 9, and then 0 through 9 again. Now, why would you want these? I mean, why would you ever want this? Well, let's switch this to 10 and see what happens here. you notice how one of them ran. See how it says 10? That's the difference between the do and the while. Do will always run first and then evaluate the expression later, where while will evaluate the expression first and then run the code. That's the difference between the do and the while loop. So very simple, very powerful. Why would you use a loop? Example, let's say you want to read a text file. You would start at the beginning of the file and then do while you're not at the end of the file, read a line. And you're going to see that in future tutorials. So the do loop and the while loop are very simple yet very powerful functions in your programs. This is Brian. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this tutorial educational and entertaining.